So we move on to advanced assembly extension, the capabilities. So it introduces something called a skeleton model, sort of mentioned it before, but basically this sits at the top of the tree. It is possible to have multiple skeletons, but for what most people do, just one is enough. The idea is to set up all of the common geometry in one model. So a skeleton model is a part file. It's a special type of model. It's seen differently with respect to bill of materials, and mass properties and things like that. It contains design, location, and interface information, as sort of mentioned, and it's always first in the model tree. So we saw before that A, B, C, D was referring back to S, which is a skeleton. Yes, it's always first in the tree, then anything else comes below it. In the context of a large assembly, you can have a skeleton at the highest level assembly, then you can have a skeleton under each sub-assembly, therefore, afterwards. A skeleton cannot exist within a part, okay? So, yeah, sorry, I already mentioned that. All right, so there's a special feature inside Creo, which is called copy geometry. In this case, there's actually two ways that it works, but the only way that I would recommend would be what's called an external copy geometry. And effectively, this allows us to draw this part. And this is the same sort of structure as the master model we talked about before, but we've got a different icon, and now this is a skeleton. We can, inside this part, activate what they call an external copy geometry feature. And that can then copy, it can copy datums. So you can say, it can actually bring a plane through, which we couldn't do before. It can bring an axis. It can bring curves through. I won't say it can bring a sketch, but it can bring curves, and it can bring surfaces as well. So we can do that. Now, the link in this case is directly between this part and this part, okay? So reality is there's no link to that top level assembly, okay? So it makes it very, the link is very direct. Okay, so that's just saying about the internal, external sort of. But if we look at this, if we look at the reference that we have, effectively we've got a link between the part and the skeleton part. There's no, like, the assembly isn't mentioned in the reference tree. Hope that makes sense. Okay, so if we add an additional part, then it can copy things in too. We don't have to copy the same information into each file. So you can see in this case, we're bringing in the surface. Oh, it's hard to tell there, isn't it? And maybe the plane. In the other case, we're bringing through other things. Okay, so we can, yeah, so this is sort of showing we can actually then maybe redefine something and bring through an axis to this part, whereas the other part doesn't have it. And this is sort of what I was talking about before. We don't necessarily want to bring everything through because everything is not required and can add performance issues around this. This day and age, probably not such a big deal, but certainly you don't want to bring everything through if you don't have to. Okay, so look, to be honest, you could stop there and you could not like use anything other than copy geometries. However, with advanced assembly, you also get the opportunity to create published geometry. So what this basically means is inside of the skeleton part that we create, we can set up sets of references that we want to allow other parts to then pull upon. So when we're in part one, we can then refer back to a published geometry feature rather than all these other individual features. Okay, so if we just follow this through. So the first one is going to refer to published geometry. The second one is going to refer to published geometry. Now, actually, what we can do is say, well, I need to make a change here. I need to add something to this published geometry because that needs to be available in part 1 and part 2, and maybe, you know, from part 3 up to part 99. Like, I need to make a change to all of them, right? I don't want to have to go through each individual part's copy geometries. I just want to update it at a higher level. So what we can then do is we can say, okay, let's redefine the published geometry to now include that datum axis. And then as soon as we do that, with a single regeneration, that's then available because we're just regenerating top down. So then if we would open any of these parts in their own window, we have that access there and we can do what we need to do, okay? And we can also have multiple published geometries. So that would handle situations where certain information needs to go to part A, and then another lot of information needs to go to part C and part B. But then it gives us the opportunity to update that and push it down in a sort of a single operation. Okay, so yes, we're using published geometry to push out new information. So it's just referring to, so in this case, we've got a part which is referring to a published geometry feature rather than referring to individual features. And yes, we can create multiples there. So this is sort of what it looks like in Creo and so on and so forth. But there are lots of options we can set with respect to how these copy geometries and published geometries work.